Hello, and welcome to Message in the Middle with Marianne. We all know that life is hard, right? It's messy, it's unpredictable, but it can be wonderful all at the same time. My hope is that we can take a deep dive into self-development topics and explore life's lessons through book clubs, conversations, and interviews. And together, we can uncover the lessons that others have already learned to help us navigate this crazy, wonderful ride called life. Hello and welcome to Message in the Middle. I'm your host, Marianne, and I'm wondering, have you ever found yourself stuck where you know you want to change, need a change, but you're not exactly sure what to do or how to do it? Maybe something feels off or out of alignment, but the idea of making the change feels overwhelming or even scary. If that sounds familiar, you're not alone, and I'm glad you're joining me today because I'm talking to Rachel Burr, an executive coach and leadership consultant with more than 20 years of experience helping people navigate that exact space, the messy middle of growth, transformation, and uncertainty. Rachel has a blend of organizational development and clinical psychology expertise. And over the last 20 years, she's helped countless clients unlock their potential, move through fear, and show up with more confidence and authenticity. Whether you're navigating a career shift, a personal reinvention, or just feeling like something needs to change, I think Rachel's expertise and down-to-earth approach is going to resonate. So let's jump into it. Rachel, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Marianne. I am thrilled to be here.
So I think we share this premise that life is complicated and it's messy. So give us the backdrop of your story and flavor of messiness that led you into this area of focus.
I love that question. One of the things, and you and I were talking about it beforehand, is I recently wrote a book, and it's called Butterfly Goo, The Down and Dirty Truth of Transformation. It is a humorous memoir about my own journey, my own path, being vulnerable and helping people laugh and look at what it really means to transform and how messy it can be. And I think that's important because I think too often we think transformation is this thing that's magic, that it looks, the butterfly, it looks perfect, but we really misunderstand and don't appreciate everything you had to go through to get there.
Yeah.
So I started my journey thinking I really wanted to be a clinical psychologist. I was about halfway through a PhD program. I was convinced this was the path for me, and I was miserable. But I had committed so much time to this idea, and I realized, well, one, I didn't enjoy what I was doing. I love being with people. I love coaching. I was working with folks who were very severely mentally ill, and I give so much credit to them and to the folks who continue to do this work, because a lot of it is just helping people get back to functioning. And what I realized was I wanted to help people step into kind of the best that they could be, take them to that next level, help them push themselves. So I wanted to get off the train, but I had no idea how to do it.
Right.
It's funny. I was surrounded by basically two groups of people on this train. And I joke about it being a circus train and it being all fun because I loved psychology. I loved studying it, all of it. And then I realized I didn't actually want to go where the train was headed.
You just like the ride, not the actual place where it was going.
Oh my gosh, I still love the ride. I still love psychology and talking about it.
I get
that.
And
it informs my coaching a lot, which is great. But I was surrounded by two groups of people. One group was ecstatic about where they were going. They wanted to be researchers. They wanted to be professors. They wanted to be clinicians. And they were so excited. They didn't know how to help me get off the train because they didn't want to get off the train. The other group of folks, they didn't want to go where we were going either, but they didn't know how to get off the train and couldn't help me. So talk about being stuck, how you feel about it. And for me, the whole journey of the book is that was one of my first big leaps off of the known path. I talk a lot about Joseph Campbell's model about the hero's or the heroine's journey. And for those of you who don't know, writer, philosopher Joseph Campbell talks about these these stages or, kind of points that we all go through in this journey, or, the big journeys that you see on the screen or in, mythic tales. And going through all this and having that be my first big leap into the unknown was really scary. I had no idea what I was going to do. I had to figure it out. And I had to trust myself to at least make that leap. And that has made all the difference.
And you hit on exactly where I was going to go after you kind of gave us your lead in, because I think fear is front and center all the time in everyone I've ever talked to, my own personal experience. Anytime we're going through a big change, anytime we're pushing out of our comfort zone, fear is right smack there and trying to block us from going there. And so, I mean, how did you take that jump, and what do you see with your clients? Like, what can we tell our listener about pushing through that, pushing past that?
I think you're absolutely right. Fear is a huge factor of what keeps us stuck, what keeps us in that comfort zone. And I always like to talk about gremlins. That's the term we use for the inner critic, that voice that tells us, oh, you can't do that. Oh, you shouldn't do that. Oh, that's very scary. And what I find, and this is it's kind of funny, overly simplistic, but a lot of times change happens when the fear of the unknown is finally dwarfed by a looming dread of the same. So for me, it's kind of that. I talk about clicks, and you think about an old combination lock, and that you have to have, this number, that number. And if you miss a click or you don't have the clicks, the lock doesn't spring open. But when you hear those clicks, you get to a point where at some point you do have that epiphany moment. The clicks lead into it. It's really important not to assume the epiphany is magic, but helping people understand that there are those steps, there are those clicks to where you want to go. And while you may not have, you and I talked about the fact that the road can change, the path can change, but focusing on, okay, what can I do now to at least move me in the direction that I want to go? I don't know exactly where that will lead me, but I can take this step.
Yeah.
I can do this one thing. And then from that step, I take the next step.
Yeah.
And so on.
You said a lot there, because I think we should call out the clicks, the lock analogy and the clicks. I think it's so important to really remind people to tune into those clicks, because I think what I've learned from talking to so many people in the midst of transformation is most of the time there's some major thing, some major click that sort of brings you to that last stop, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to your point, that's like, it gets big enough that I then have to do something about it. But I still hope that we can get better at recognizing the voices, the clicks, the inner intuition, whatever you want to call it, that's telling us much earlier. Because I guarantee something told you much earlier than the point where you jumped off that train, that you needed to jump off that train. And I think that if we could all get a little better at listening to our clicks, our intuition, those messages, we'd be in a better position. And to your point, once we do, and if we can just take one little step, it's all it takes. It really does take one step and then another step and then another step. And I think that's often challenging to convince people that it's that easy, quote unquote easy.
Yeah, quote unquote.
But it really is all about being open to taking that first step and not knowing all the answers. And I think a lot of us aren't used to that.
Mm-mm. Well, and I think the world tells us, I think from early on, even in our education, that we should have a path. Or the term I honestly hate is the idea of, oh, we should find our path. We can find a starting point, but we build the path. We build that journey of 1,000 miles by a single step. And I think it's important because that whole idea that we're supposed to know, or that if we're stuck, we're doing something wrong, is really self-defeating. And back to your point about hearing the clicks beforehand. Oh, I had red flags, whispering, flowing all over the place. Oh my gosh. I was so good at tamping that down.
Of course.
And you talk about the fact that it's kind of a whisper, and then it's maybe a tap, and then it's like a shove, and you keep trying to ignore it.
Yeah.
It's like I'm putting my fingers in my
Yeah.
ears, like la 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 la.
Yes.
And there is something, to your point, there is this big click. There is this big thing that all of a sudden breaks us open. And we walk over this threshold from the known into the unknown, or what we're going to do next. And we don't know when that's going to happen,
Yeah.
but we can take it one step at a time. And every time we take that step out of our comfort zone gets a little bigger and
Yes.
bigger and bigger. And we keep pushing and pushing and pushing. And before we know it, we can't even see
Yeah.
where the line of that comfort zone used to be.
Well, and we get less scared of the not
Mm-hmm.
knowing, right? We're like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I did this 3 times already. I took 3 unknown steps. I'm good. I can do the 4th, right? It does become a practice. It doesn't completely take the scariness away, but it definitely tamps it down for sure over time. And I think you alluded to it a second time here, but what you said at the beginning about sort of not recognizing the goo and just sort of seeing the end result. I think, again, we're a society of showing these flashpoints, right? And we've heard people say before, like, it looks like success happened overnight and it really was a 25, 30-year journey or whatever. That's true. Those things are true. And the same goes for, these less high profile things, any kind of change, any kind of transformation. It's not like it's just somebody flipped a switch and boom, they were whatever the new thing is. It's messy in the middle and you just got to work your way through it. So it's worth noting that it really is a journey through it all, for sure.
It is. And the reason I like the analogy of the butterfly is, to your point, it looks like, oh, there was this, all of a sudden, it was this magic awakening, that it was an overnight success. And what we don't realize is, yes, caterpillar, butterfly, it looks like a huge difference. The reality is the caterpillar goes into the cocoon or the chrysalis, and it dissolves into this gelatinous green goo. It dissolves into its fundamental building blocks. And from there, it builds something new. And what's important about that is the caterpillar took everything in to that cocoon that it needed in order to transform. And the goo isn't just something that's there, that's a struggle. It's critical to the journey. The butterfly having to force its way out of the cocoon or the chrysalis is critical to its wings being able to unfurl. That is part of the journey. That's not only just, it's like, oh yeah, I have to do it. Is critical. And as we go through it, to your point, we take those steps, we lose the fear, we start to appreciate our strengths and who we are, who we want to be, but who we are. And it's not that we're turning ourselves into something we're not. It's about stepping into the best of who we are.
So let's talk about that acknowledging our strengths, because again, another thing that typically stands at the doorway of change alongside of fear is our inner dialogue around, I'm not enough, I'm not smart enough, brave enough, accomplished enough, all the enoughs, whatever the enoughs are. So what advice do you have for starting to shift that dialogue and recognizing all that we do bring to the table and that we are enough?
One of the things, and it's funny, I think people have different views of this. There's a difference between hearing the voices or hearing the messages and believing them. I don't think it's a good idea to just completely push them away, because when we push things down and push them into the dark, they tend to thrive. It's this almost kind of cancerous thing that grows in the dark. What I would recommend is sit with it for a little bit. What is it trying to tell you? What are you hearing? Because a lot of times that voice is old.
Yeah.
It happened maybe when we were kids, or it happened when, something else, it was a different stage of our life. We were going through different hurdles and challenges. And even though we kind of feel that voice is evil, at least what I've come to see is it thinks it's trying to protect us, and it scares us to do it. But that's the old version. It doesn't realize that it's no longer serving us. So thinking about, well, okay, if the voice says, well, you can't do this. Well, okay, what's the proof of that? Have I tried? So you start having this almost dialogue and you challenge it. And then you challenge the thing is, okay, well, what happens if I don't do that? What does that look like? Because sometimes people will say, okay, well, I'm just not going to make a decision now. Well, not making a decision is a decision.
Mm.
So when you focus on, okay, don't do this, and look at the other side. Okay, if you don't do this, what's the positive? What keeps you safe? And what are you missing out on? Like, what are you going to fail to do? Because our brains are set up a lot of times to look at failure and be afraid of that. Okay, well, let's look at what you're giving up. Let's look at the failure that can happen by staying small. So it's hard, but I do think it's recognizing what we're telling ourselves, because if we don't, we can't change the dialogue, and we want to change the dialogue.
I agree. I mean, I think recognizing is always the first thing. Self-awareness is, I think you can go through a whole period of just getting self-aware, listening to the voices, really understanding your inner dialogue before you even take a step if you need to. But at least you're starting to tune in and starting to recognize those patterns and understand what's going on there. So yeah, I think my experience too is not to push it away, but to just acknowledge it and say, yeah, I hear you, but I'm all set this time, or I'm all set in this situation.
Yeah.
But yeah, acknowledge it, but move past it. I'm interested what you would say to the person who says it's too late. And because when you said, you had already put all these years in, the immediate thing I thought of was I've had a similar scenario, and you think sort of the sunk cost is the sunk cost. But when you're in the middle of it, you don't think that. You're like, I've got 10 years into this. I've got 20 years into this. I've got whatever. How do I walk away from it? How do I shift from it? And that sometimes is hard. You can get up in your head and get stuck in the, how do I leave that and not make it be like it was a waste of time because or money, right? Whatever the value is, and put that in. So what do you say to that?
Well, and you're right. The sunk cost bias it's inherent to human beings. The research they've done of how much we're willing to keep pushing to do the same thing, hoping that it'll change at some point, even though it's not working.
Yeah.
And yet we just double down on that. I'm reminded of the time my brother at one point came to live with me, and he let me use his story in the book because it was part of my journey. And he was 28 years old at the time, and he hadn't gone to college. He'd been really drifting in his life. And he was finally really pulling it together in a direction. I was so proud of him, and I was so impressed with him. And we were talking one day, and he's like, I think I want to go back to college. I'm like, that's great. And he's like, yeah, he's like, I don't know. I'm like, why? He said, well, if I go back now, he's like, I'll be 32 when I graduate.
Mm.
He's like, I'll be old. First of all,
Ouch.
we think you're old. Don't mean that,
Ouch.
right? But he's like, I'll be 32 when I graduate. Well, how old will you be if you don't go back?
Yeah.
If you've put all this time into something that is now making you miserable, not fulfilling you, and you think, well, it'll take me X a number of years to rebuild something else. Okay. In X number of years, do you want to be further entrenched? Do you want to still be miserable? Do you want to maybe be even more miserable and lose the time that you could have spent doing something else?
Yeah.
And what we've done, I think that's the other thing. I look at my own path, and yes, I got off the path of clinical psychology. But what I recognized was that had helped me develop a lot of my skills, my insights. We have these building blocks. And I was talking to someone recently who is going through a huge change in their career. And they have it's the idea of like this thing. I have a lot of analogies, so I mix them around. So the idea of building a house, and we have this blueprint, and we think if we move out of the house, we'll never find a house like that again. We'll never be able to take that house with us. And it's like, that's not the point. The point is, how do you deconstruct that house into the valuable building blocks and mortar and all of the building materials you have? And how do you take that and build something new? What is it you're good at? It's not about this particular job or this particular thing I've settled into. It's about, for me, it was like, I understand human behavior. I understand insights. I knew how to do some research. I started saying, okay, what can I do with these things? And it wasn't going to be perfect right away, but it's like, all right, I'm not starting from scratch.
Yeah.
I've put in a lot of time. I've developed a lot in the however many years you've been doing something. let's recognize that and break it down. What is it that you're taking forward? Because it's not a waste. You've got a whole treasure trove of tools and building blocks and things to work with. Let's figure out what those are.
I love that point. And because I can so relate, because I was in a job for a very, very long time. And I know sometimes we get so stuck in the title, in the role, that we actually lose sight of how transferable our skills are. And I've heard it over and over. And again, that's why it's come up in recent podcasts, but people talking about stories of, people being out of work for, let's say they were out of work for 5 years, 10 years, they were raising kids and they're like, oh, how can I go back? I don't have any skills. Or being between jobs and trying to figure out how to transfer them. I think learning to be able to really take a step back and objectively figure out what our skills are, what our strengths are, and how they can transfer outside of the specific role you were using them in, that is such a huge win. And I think that sometimes we get stuck and we can't figure out how to do that. And that's a really great skill if you can figure out how to do that. So I love that you called that out.
Well, and it is hard to be objective about ourselves, to see that. That's what I love about coaching. And you don't need a coach. Build your village. Who are your friends?
Yeah.
Who are your friends? Who are other people that can provide you insight, that you trust, that won't just tell you what you want to hear, that will provide you insights that we all can step back to some extent, and we should. And we're all going to have blind spots.
Yes.
So who are the people around you that can help you do this? Because one of the biggest sticking points is thinking you have to do this alone.
Yeah. Yes. And I'm glad you said you don't need a coach. Great if you want one. But if you don't, or you can't, you're right. People can give you feedback, or even just thinking about, what do people come to you for help with? What kind of things do you do, when you're in the group of people you're in, and what are you raising your hand for? And what do they look to you for? Those are hints right there that you don't necessarily tap into, but they're there. So it's really great when you can start doing that work. So it informs you quite a bit.
I love that.
I want to sort of take a different angle for a minute. So you work with a lot of high performing people and people in leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And as we think about change and transforming, a lot of times to a lot of people, that means, what's my next thing? What's my next badge? What's my next title? What's my next rung on the ladder? We both know we're in this culture of busy, 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 though it's shifting. I want to say that out loud. It is shifting. What do you say? What's your perspective on trying to navigate this world of, busy badges and really find success in a place that's more in alignment with your core values and more sustainable?
That is such a good question. And it can be so hard, because there's always going to be the pressure of what society thinks success means. To your point, the busyness or the exhaustion or all of it is like a badge of honor, that we talk about it as though we're fighting through the trenches, and we should be proud of the fact that we only slept 3 hours last night, which anyway, that's a whole biology thing. We don't even realize how dysfunctional we're creating it. I think recognizing the fact that when you dig into your core, when you figure out what's really important to you, what your values are, what is going to help you thrive. And just as a slight pause, because I think sometimes when people say, oh, follow your passion, be happy, and people are like, oh, that's not realistic. It's like, I'm not telling you to all of a sudden decide to go off and be a ballet dancer. I mean, if you want to and you can, that's great. I'm talking about, let's dig in to figure out who you are. You have values. What are they?
Yeah.
Is what you value the same thing as what society values? Is it the ladder you're climbing? And if it is, great, do that. Some people are adrenaline junkies. Some people love this, and it actually is for them. I'm not dismissing that. I'm saying that for those of us who feel stuck, who feel that friction, there's something not right, first figuring out, okay, what are my values? What is it I want? Where are my values probably being stepped on in this process? And then when you do get to a point where you're starting to recognize that, starting to embrace it, and starting to reinforce that what you value and what you want that is success, just know that the world will always be out there to tell you differently.
Mm-hmm.
There will always be somebody holding up the bar and saying, but you don't quite match up. And maybe they're not even talking to you. They're just on Facebook or they're on Insta or they're on
Yeah.
TikTok showing you what a fabulous life they have. And you're the one holding up, the mirror and saying, wow, I don't match up. Creating resilience for yourself and recognizing that is never going to go away. You need to be able to stay grounded, and you'll get hit, you'll feel off kilter sometimes, and that's okay. Normalizing all the fact that even when you develop these skills, not every day is going to be perfect.
Right.
But when you start to believe in yourself, when I have these moments and I see, oh, well, this person is vice president of, global leadership development and everything, it's like, oh, if I'd stayed on that path, that could have been me. And it's like, yes. And it would have stepped on your value of freedom and creativity and being able to develop your own ideas of what it is and where you want to focus, as opposed to where other people think you should focus, and honestly getting pulled into a lot of things that are not in line with the value that you really could bring. That's not going to go away. How we choose to respond to it, that's where our empowerment comes from.
Oh, I love that. And I agree with that. I think there's a bit of vulnerability there that you have to expose, which again is scary, right? How am I going to push back? How am I going to show up and say that this isn't in alignment with me? How am I going to stand outside of everybody else and say, no, I don't want to work every weekend for the next 26 weeks or whatever the scenario?
Mm-hmm.
That can be very vulnerable.
Oh, it's huge, especially when, kind of like me being back on the train. You may not have a lot of people around you modeling that vulnerability or modeling that strength that it takes to go against the herd. So it's hard.
So I guess that's part of the message. The message is it's not easy, and it is hard.
Mm-hmm.
It is hard. I guess we should acknowledge that, right? It is hard, but so is staying stuck and not changing and not exploring and not growing. So,
well, I don't even think just staying stuck is hard. I think staying stuck is soul crushing. And
it can be.
I think the longer you stay stuck, I think my experience was I kind of felt like I was pulling further and further inside myself. I was making myself smaller. And I think I was, soul crushing. I was just eroding, all of that I was, because I was trying to live up to these expectations. For what? To be accepted into, and don't get me wrong, I worked with really good people who were wonderful leaders, wonderful business people. It was just the fact that I didn't want to do what they were doing. So it's not about judging them.
Yeah.
But me thinking I needed to be that when it's not really what I wanted to be. It's not just hard. It's devastating.
Yeah, I can relate. And I think sometimes we don't even realize that's going on. I think that we can get so caught up in doing and being and, achieving and all the things that at some point we get, if we're lucky, we get to a point where we're like, wait, how did I get here? And is this really what I wanted? And that's when you start to break out or uncover and start remembering who you really were, because it does, for many of us, it gets lost along the way. And so getting to the point where you recognize that's actually a gift.
It is. Yeah. Just being able to, maybe not even being lost, but it's buried. It's buried in there somewhere.
100%.
And Joseph Campbell again talks about this idea of the path, that if you find a path let's say you're in the woods and you find a path, that's not your path. It's someone else's path. We build our path. And it is easy because there are so many paths that are easy to get on. There are so many conveyor belts of life that you walk out with a degree. And so you do this and you do that. And by the way, then you have a family and then you do this. And if you want the things in terms of the path that you're on, great, do that. But if you're not, then you're not on the right path. And there's nobody out there to create a new path for you other than you. You can have help along the way, but you're building it. And it's the most empowering and terrifying thing that will ultimately absolutely be fulfilling. You gotta stick with it and you gotta follow your North Star.
Yeah, I like that. Well, if there's one message, is that it? If there's one message that we can leave with our listener, what would it be?
My mantra, and I say it to myself every day because I'm not finished growing yet and I'm still stuck in certain parts. If we want a different life, we have to live a different life.
Mhm.
We can't continue to do the same things and expect our lives to change, expect the world to change, expect us to change. We have to live differently if we want something different.
I love that. Love that. Love that. So tell us, Rachel, where can people find you? Where are you most active?
LinkedIn, always LinkedIn. I think everybody's on LinkedIn. I am doing Instagram and Facebook. Those are mostly about my book, The Butterfly Goo, The Down and Dirty Truth of Transformation. And if you want to find the book, it's butterflygoobook.net. If you're looking more at leadership coaching, my company website is catamentum.com. But if you want to look there, you want to look on LinkedIn, I am a lot of different places. So reach out and find me.
Thank you so much for talking with me today. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you, Marianne.
Thanks so much for listening to today's episode of Message in the Middle. I hope you found something in this conversation that reminded you that you're not alone and that midlife isn't about winding down. It's about waking up. You're not done. You're just becoming. If this episode speaks to you at all, please share it with a friend who needs to hear it. And if you're enjoying the show, I'd be so grateful if you could take a moment to leave a review. It really helps other women find this community and this podcast. Until next time, take care of yourself.